Every second you hesitate, doubt is stealing your life. Every moment you overthink, fear is writing your story for you. Today we end that. This audiobook will teach you the exact mental system top performers use to silence doubt, take decisive action, and build unshakable confidence. One thought, one habit, one action at a time. If you commit, by the time we finish, you will no longer hesitate. You will no longer question yourself. You will act, and you will win. Chapter 1. Stop proving and start doing. Self-doubt begins with proving. You have spent years proving to parents, proving to friends, proving to colleagues, proving to strangers on the internet. Every attempt to show value to others is a drain on your mind. Every attempt to gain approval is a delay in action. That is the first law you must understand. Self-doubt is the natural consequence of seeking external validation. You don't need their permission. You don't need their approval. You don't need their applause. What you need is action. That is the key. Action beats approval. Action beats doubt. Act now. Repeat it in your mind. Repeat it in your schedule. Repeat it in every decision. Look at the world. Observe the high performers. Entrepreneurs, creators, leaders. They do not spend time proving. They do not ask if it is good enough. They build. They act. They produce. The output itself demonstrates competence. The work speaks. The results show. You imitate this principle when you shift your focus from proving to doing. That is the first system to implement. Build before you explain. Act before you justify. Repeat consistently. Now understand the mechanics. Seeking approval is a habit. It is an automatic loop. The loop begins with thought. Will they approve? It triggers fear. Fear produces hesitation. Hesitation produces inaction. Inaction reinforces self-doubt. The loop feeds itself. You cannot reason it away. You cannot convince yourself with pep talks. You must interrupt the system. That is the rule. That is the discipline. Interrupt it with action. Interrupt it with output. Interrupt it with completion. You have a choice. You have the choice to continue proving, to continue seeking validation, to continue the loop. Or you have the choice to stop. That is the key. The choice is yours. Choose action. Choose results. Choose repetition over intensity. You don't change your life. You change what you repeat. That is the principle. Repeat it aloud. Repeat it daily. Repeat it in every behavior. Let us translate this into a system. The first rule: identify one habit of approval seeking per day. Write it down. Example: checking social media for likes. Example: asking a peer for feedback before finishing a task. Example: explaining your actions before doing them. Identify it. Note it. Monitor it. That is step 1. Step 2. Replace that habit with a completion-based behavior. If you normally ask for approval, complete the task first. Deliver the work. Finish the project. Act without validation. Build a small track record of independent action. You cannot ignore the law of repetition. The system demands it. Repeat the behavior daily. Small actions. Consistent actions. That is how confidence is constructed. Step 3. Measure output, not reception. The system must be observable. Metrics matter. Count completed tasks. Track time spent building. Record progress. Stop counting compliments. Stop tracking praise. Stop measuring approval. Only measure action. That is the rule. That is the discipline. That is how you train your mind to act without doubt. Consider the example of a top entrepreneur. They spend 4 hours creating a product, 2 hours improving it, 0 hours explaining it to anyone until it exists. When the product launches, results speak louder than words. Nobody questions competence. Nobody doubts skill. That is the standard. That is the model. You imitate it by acting first, proving never. You have likely argued with yourself in the past. You have debated whether action is good enough. You have weighed approval against results. Stop it. Debate is waste. Argument is delay. Action is clarity. That is the key. The more you act, the smaller doubt becomes. Repetition annihilates hesitation. Repetition rewires your brain. Repetition builds confidence that does not depend on applause. Understand this principle fully. Action is a behavior, not a feeling. You do not wait to feel confident before acting. You act to create confidence. That is the inversion most people miss. You do not wait for certainty. You create certainty through doing. Repetition is the mechanism. Completion is the proof. Habit is the engine. That is the structure of unshakable confidence. Implement this rule. Start today with one task. Identify the next step in your life that you have delayed due to approval seeking. Commit to doing it without permission. Commit to completing it without explanation. Commit to finishing it before anyone knows. You don't need their permission. That is the key. You don't need their applause. You don't need their recognition. You need completion. That is the discipline. Next, reinforce it. Repeat it every day. Morning, afternoon, evening. Take small actions. Accumulate results. Review output. Adjust the system. Remove distractions that encourage approval seeking. Silence social comparison. Limit conversation to constructive planning. Each small adjustment compounds. Each repeat builds confidence. Each completion chips away at self-doubt. That is the process. That is the practice. That is the method. Here is the second system layer. Output sequencing. Do the hardest or most scrutinized task first. Do not wait for reassurance. Begin with discomfort. Act in uncertainty. Complete despite fear. The first success in a day conditions your mind for all others. Repetition strengthens the neural pathway of independent action. You don't change your life. You change what you repeat. That is the second iteration. Repeat it consistently. Let us summarize the chapter's rules. Identify one approval-seeking habit per day. Replace it with completion-first action. Measure output, not reception. Act before you justify. Sequence difficult tasks first. Repeat every day. Small, consistent, non-negotiable repetition. Do not debate. Do not procrastinate. Do not rationalize. That is weakness. That is the system breaking down. Follow the structure. Implement the rules. Repeat the behaviors. Build the mental circuits for independent action. That is how self-doubt is neutralized. That is how confidence becomes automatic. That is how the cycle of proving is broken. Action beats approval. Action beats doubt. Act now. Act every day. Repeat the system. Repeat the principle. Repeat the discipline. You don't need their permission. You don't need their applause. You don't need anyone to recognize your work. You need action. That is the law. That is the rule. That is the first step to eliminating self-doubt. The final point for this chapter: you have a choice. Continue proving. Continue questioning. Continue delaying. Or start doing. Choose doing. Build your system. Repeat actions. Measure output. Silence the inner critic. That is the path to unshakable confidence. That is the foundation. The next chapter will teach you how to identify the source of doubt within yourself and crush it before it dictates behavior. One step leads to the next. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have a choice. Act now. Chapter 2: The Silent Cost of Seeking Validation. Most people fail silently, not because they lack skill, not because they lack opportunity. They fail because they seek permission. They seek validation. They measure their choices by others' approval. That is the trap. Validation steals mental energy. Validation fuels indecision. It creates hesitation before every action. Every second you wait for someone else to nod, your mind shrinks, your courage diminishes, and your momentum is stolen. That is the law you must understand. You have a choice. You can continue asking, seeking, and waiting. Or you can act independently. That is the key. Your worth is not permission. Your worth is action. Repeat it. Repeat it often. Let condition your mind. Your worth is not permission. Your worth is action. Observe high performers, leaders, entrepreneurs, creators. Notice their schedules. Notice their decisions. They do not run every choice past a committee of opinions. They do not measure every step by approval. They act. They commit. They execute. Every action compounds confidence. Every action builds clarity. This is not an accident. It is deliberate. It is systematic. It is structural. They understand a principle most ignore: permission is irrelevant. Results are not contingent on consent. Consider a case study. A software founder I observed spent his first 3 years seeking approval. He waited for advisors to validate ideas. He delayed launches to satisfy peers. He measured every feature by potential praise. Progress was slow. Doubt was constant. Then he changed. He eliminated outside validation from his decision-making. He acted first. He delivered before consulting. He committed to his own judgment. Within 1 year, output tripled. The mind became clear. Decisions sharpened. Hesitation disappeared. Confidence became automatic. That is the system. That is the lesson. Validation functions like a drain on attention. Every thought you devote to approval is energy stolen from creation. Every moment you weigh opinion is a moment delayed from execution. You cannot recover that energy. You cannot reassign that time. That is the law. Energy is finite. Attention is finite. Every distraction diminishes the system. You do not change your life by seeking approval. You change your life by building action systems that do not require it. Repeat the phrase, "Your worth is not permission. Your worth is action." Internalize it. Condition yourself with it. Let us convert this into a system. Step 1. Audit approval-seeking behavior. Identify decisions you have delayed to gain consent. Identify behaviors you have repeated to earn praise. Track them. Write them down. Observation is the first rule of structural change. You cannot fix what you do not see. You cannot act on what you cannot measure. That is the rule. That is the principle. Step 2. Remove dependence on permission. For every identified behavior, take action without consulting. Commit to a course. Deliver results. Track the outcome. Do not ask if it is acceptable. Do not seek nods or smiles. Focus only on completion and effect. This is the discipline. This is the habit. Repeat daily. Repetition strengthens mental circuits. Action becomes automatic. Approval becomes irrelevant. Step 3. Replace external validation with internal metrics. Measure your success by results, not reception. Count projects completed. Track time dedicated. Monitor progress objectively. Ignore applause. Ignore acknowledgement. Measure only execution. That is the system. That is the structural adjustment. That is how you train your mind to value action over approval. Now consider the cumulative effect. Each instance of approval seeking delays execution. Multiply that by days, weeks, months. The lost momentum is substantial. The mental drain is enormous. Every second spent questioning, worrying, or justifying is energy diverted from creation. You cannot reclaim it. You cannot outsource it. You must prevent it. That is the principle. That is the rule. Action first. Approval never. Repeat. Your worth is not permission. Your worth is action. You may be tempted to argue, to rationalize, to claim that permission is necessary. Stop. That is weakness. That is a flaw in discipline. You do not debate structural rules. You implement them. The system is non-negotiable. Execute the rules. Condition your mind. Build a mental firewall against approval. That is how clarity emerges. That is how confidence becomes automatic. Consider the neural pattern. The more you seek validation, the more your brain reinforces hesitation. Each approval-seeking moment strengthens doubt circuits. Each delay becomes habit. Each hesitation becomes instinctive. The reverse is also true. Each independent action, each completion without consent, rewires the mind. Confidence circuits strengthen. Hesitation weakens. The habit of action becomes permanent. That is the science. That is the system. That is the principle. Implement this today. Identify one decision you have been delaying for approval. Take it. Complete it. Do not ask. Do not explain. Do not wait. Repeat with the next decision. Repeat daily. Reinforce your mental architecture. Build your confidence framework. Repeat until automatic. That is the training. That is the method. The next layer of this system is pre-commitment. Commit to the day's actions before you begin. Plan completion before seeking consent. Sequence tasks to enforce independent execution. Each success builds structural confidence. Each failure reinforces independence. This is the cycle. This is the drill. This is the foundation for eliminating doubt permanently. Let us summarize the rules of this chapter. Audit approval-seeking behavior daily. Take action without permission. Commit first, deliver results second. Replace external validation with internal metrics. Reinforce repetition. Action first, approval irrelevant. Sequence tasks to build structural independence. Do not negotiate. Do not delay. Do not rationalize. You have a choice. You can continue seeking approval and drain mental energy. Or you can act independently, measure output, and build automatic confidence. That is the system. That is the law. That is the silent cost of seeking validation. Your worth is not permission. Your worth is action. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Condition your mind. Train your behavior. Eliminate hesitation. Stop allowing approval to steal clarity. Stop allowing approval to steal energy. Build systems that enforce independent action. Build habits that strengthen confidence. Repeat until automatic. The next chapter will teach you to identify and crush the exact source of self-doubt inside your own mind before it dictates your behavior. One step leads to the next. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have the choice. Act now. Chapter 3. Name your doubt, then crush it. Doubt is a thought. That is the first principle. It exists only because you have given it permission. It manifests as hesitation, as indecision, as inaction. It blocks movement. It delays progress. It whispers, "You are not ready. You are not enough. You cannot do it." These whispers are predictable. They are repetitive. They are entirely manageable. You have a choice. You can continue listening, or you can act. That is the key. You do not need their permission. You do not need certainty. You do not need comfort. You need awareness and action. Step 1. See your doubt. Observe it as you would a machine. Observe it dispassionately. Label it. Write down. Speak aloud. Capture it in a mental journal. Capture it in an audio recording. This is not reflection. This is intelligence gathering. This is reconnaissance. You're collecting data on the enemy. That is the system. That is the structure. You don't change your life. You change what you repeat. Identify the exact thought you repeat that generates hesitation. That is the principle. That is the rule. Step 2. Name your doubt. Give it clarity. Give it specificity. Don't generalize. Don't blur the edges. The thought, "I might fail," becomes, "I am afraid my presentation will be inadequate." The thought, "I am not ready," becomes, "I have not completed these 3 tasks," and that triggers hesitation. Naming is not optional. Naming converts chaos into structure. Naming converts fear into actionable insight. You cannot act on vague signals. You cannot crush an undefined enemy. That is the law. That is the discipline. Step 3, destroy the doubt. Not with argument, not with hope, not with encouragement. Destroy it with action. Destroy it with repetition. Destroy it with structural response. For every named doubt, implement a counter behavior. You fear the presentation. Deliver it to an empty room. Record it. Analyze it. Improve it. Execute it. Repeat it. That is how doubt is neutralized. That is how hesitation is eliminated. That is how the mind is trained to act without asking permission from fear. See it. Name it. Destroy it. See it. Name it. Destroy it. Repeat aloud. Repeat mentally. Repeat in behavior. This is the mantra of disciplined action. This is the drill of high performers. Repetition beats intensity. Repetition beats fear. Repetition conditions the mind. Do not skip it. Do not rationalize it. Implement it fully. Implement it daily. Implement it without compromise. That is the system. That is the principle. That is how you break self-doubt at its root. Use a doubt inventory. That is the tool. Maintain a list of recurring doubts. Note the triggers. Note the thoughts. Note the behavioral consequences. Review it weekly. Update it daily. This is intelligence collection. This is structural awareness. Every item is actionable. Every item is a target. Every item is subject to elimination. You do not debate it. You do not justify it. You act on it. That is the rule. That is the discipline. That is the principle. Consider the mechanics. Doubt grows in silence. Doubt multiplies when unobserved. Doubt gains power when ignored. That is how hesitation becomes habit. That is how inaction becomes automatic. Observation is the first strike. Naming is the second strike. Destruction is the third strike. Repeat the cycle. Repeat every day. Repeat for every doubt. The mind becomes conditioned. The habit of hesitation is replaced by the habit of execution. That is the method. That is the system. That is the law. You may feel discomfort. That is expected. Confronting doubt is not comfortable. That is intentional. Comfort reinforces hesitation. Discomfort builds execution. That is the rule. That is the drill. That is how transformation occurs. You do not wait for confidence. You generate confidence by taking measured, repeatable action against each identified doubt. You do not wait for certainty. You generate certainty by executing despite hesitation. Repeat aloud. See it. Name it. Destroy it. Now, implement a daily protocol. Step 1. Identify your 3 most persistent doubts. Step 2. Write them down in clear, precise language. Step 3. Plan a concrete action for each. Step 4. Execute. Step 5. Record the result. Step 6. Review. Step 7. Repeat. Daily repetition rewires the mind. Daily execution neutralizes hesitation. Daily accountability eliminates fear. That is the system. That is the structure. That is the discipline. Remember, doubt is a thought, not a reality. Hesitation is behavior, not identity. You are not your doubt. You are not your fear. You are the system you implement. You are the repetition you enforce. You are the execution you deliver. That is the principle. That is the rule. That is the training. Consider a real-world application. An entrepreneur feared pitching investors. The doubt, they will reject me. I will fail. Step 1, see it. He listed every negative thought. Step 2, name it. I'm afraid of rejection in this specific pitch. Step 3, destroy it. He rehearsed the pitch to a mirror. He recorded it. He practiced until delivery was precise. He executed the pitch. Outcome was secondary. Action was primary. Repetition built confidence. Repetition rewired the mind. He learned the law. See it. Name it. Destroy it. The final principle: you have a choice. You can allow doubt to direct your actions. You can permit hesitation to determine your behavior. Or you can identify each doubt, name it precisely, and destroy it through systematic action. That is the rule. That is the system. That is the principle. Repeat aloud. See it. Name it. Destroy it. See it. Name it. Destroy it. You do not debate. You do not negotiate. You do not rationalize. You act. That is the key. Action is the antidote. Action is the system. Action is the discipline. Each completed execution removes the power of doubt. Each repeated cycle strengthens the mind. Each conscious confrontation rewires your behavior. That is how hesitation ends. That is how self-doubt is neutralized. The next chapter will teach you to implement micro-commitments that build unshakable confidence through repetition. One small action leads to the next. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have the choice. Act now. Chapter 4. The Power of Micro-Commitments. Confidence is not built in a single action. It is not built in grand gestures. It is built in repetition. Small, deliberate, consistent actions compound into unshakable confidence. That is the principle. That is the rule. You have a choice. You can wait for motivation. You can wait for inspiration. Or you can act now in small increments. That is the key. Start small. Finish strong. Repeat daily. Start small. Finish strong. Micro-commitments are the building blocks of discipline. They are deliberately small, achievable, and repeatable. Their purpose is not intensity. Their purpose is consistency. 5 minutes of focused work. 1 email sent immediately. 1 task completed without delay. That is enough. That is all that is required to initiate momentum. Momentum compounds. Confidence compounds. Doubt diminishes. That is the law. That is the system. That is the discipline. Begin by auditing your daily actions. Identify tasks you procrastinate. Identify steps you avoid. Break them into micro-commitments. A single paragraph written. 1 phone call made. 1 meeting prepared. 1 habit repeated. That is the rule. That is the structure. That is the system. You don't change your life in 1 leap. You change what you repeat. Repeat it aloud. Repeat it daily. Start small. Finish strong. Repeat daily. Consider the mental mechanics. Each small action sends a signal to the mind. I am capable. I am disciplined. I follow through. That signal grows stronger with repetition. Doubt shrinks in proportion to executed action. 1 micro-commitment, repeated daily, builds neural circuits of confidence. 1 micro-commitment, repeated daily, creates structural discipline. 1 micro-commitment, repeated daily, transforms hesitation into automatic execution. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the law. Do not underestimate small actions. Most people fail because they aim for radical change. They attempt intensity instead of structure. They aim to overhaul habits in a single day. That is failure. That is chaos. That is wasted energy. The opposite works. Incremental, consistent repetition yields results. Start small. Finish strong. Repeat daily. That is the law of compounding for mental discipline. That is how confidence is built. That is how self-doubt is eliminated. Here is the system. Step 1. Choose 1 micro-commitment per day. Identify a task you've been delaying. Identify a step that feels manageable but meaningful. Commit to completing it today. Step 2. Execute immediately. Do not postpone. Do not wait for permission. Do not rationalize. Step 3. Reflect and repeat. Review progress at the end of the day. Track completion. Reinforce success. Step 4. Scale gradually. Add 1 additional micro-commitment per day or per week. Increase volume, not intensity. That is the discipline. That is the structure. That is the process. Example, sending a single email. Most people delay. They draft and redraft. They wait for approval. They overthink. Execution does not require perfection. Execution requires completion. Send the email. Task finished. Confidence built. Neural circuit reinforced. Repeat the process. Repeat for every action. Repeat until automatic. That is how small actions become unstoppable momentum. That is the power of micro-commitments. That is the system. Another example, a 5-minute focus exercise. Minimal time, maximum reinforcement. Sit, concentrate, eliminate distraction. Complete the 5 minutes. That is the micro-commitment. That is the action. That is the training. Consistency over intensity. Repeat daily. Neural pathways strengthen. Focus becomes automatic. Discipline is wired into the mind. That is the law. That is the principle. That is the rule. You may resist. You may rationalize. You may argue that small actions do not matter. Ignore that. That is weakness. That is the flaw of impatience. Systems beat intensity. Repetition beats effort. Structure beats chaos. That is why micro-commitments dominate radical effort. That is why habitual action outperforms sporadic intensity. That is why high performers focus on daily execution rather than grand plans. Repeat aloud, start small, finish strong, repeat daily. The third layer of the system, accountability. Track micro-commitments. Record completion. Measure daily. Review weekly. Adjust the system. Eliminate excuses. Reinforce repetition. Reinforce structural discipline. Each small, tracked action compounds into massive capability. Each completed micro-commitment conditions the mind. Each repeated cycle reduces hesitation. That is the method. That is the process. That is the system. Remember, confidence is not a feeling. It is a byproduct of repeated action. It is a structural outcome of completed tasks. It is measurable. It is observable. It is predictable. Micro-commitments generate that structure. Micro-commitments generate that discipline. Micro-commitments generate clarity. That is the law. That is the rule. That is the principle. Final rule of the chapter. You have a choice. You can wait for motivation. You can wait for certainty. Or you can commit to one micro-action today. Complete it. Repeat tomorrow. Repeat again. Build your confidence circuit. Build your mental system. Replace hesitation with execution. Replace doubt with action. That is your task. That is your responsibility. That is the discipline. Repeat aloud. Start small. Finish strong. Repeat daily. Start small. Finish strong. The next chapter will teach you how to silence your inner critic before it interferes with micro-commitments, ensuring your actions are uninterrupted by doubt or fear. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have a choice. Act now. Chapter 5. Silence your inner critic. Your inner critic is predictable. It speaks with certainty. It measures inadequacy. It points out flaws. It magnifies mistakes. It thrives on distraction. It thrives on overthinking. That is the system it uses to control you. It is effective only because you allow it to be. You have a choice. You can listen. You can argue. You can debate. Or you can act. That is the key. Criticize less. Act more. Criticize less. Act more. Repeat it. Repeat it aloud. Let condition your mind. The critic operates in two ways. First, it attacks potential. You cannot do this. You are not ready. You will fail. Second, it attacks past actions. You should have done this differently. You made a mistake. You missed the opportunity. Both forms are destructive. Both forms are habitual. Both forms are automatic. You cannot reason with them. You cannot explain them away. You cannot motivate yourself out of them. You must neutralize them structurally. That is the law. That is the principle. That is the system. Step 1, pause. When a critic speaks, stop. Stop your internal dialogue. Stop your habitual reaction. Observe the thought. Do not respond emotionally. Do not justify. Do not argue. Pause. That is the first strike. That is the discipline. That is the system. Step 2, breathe. Focus attention on the breath. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The mind cannot overthink while grounded in a controlled rhythm. Distraction is neutralized. The critic loses power. The body signals calm. The brain shifts from emotional reaction to rational processing. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the structural intervention. Step 3, respond with fact-based action. Action, not emotion. Completion, not debate. Solve the problem immediately. Address the task. Execute the step. Action replaces speculation. Action replaces self-punishment. Action replaces criticism. Each response rewires the neural pattern. Each completed action strengthens the habit of execution. Each repeated cycle diminishes the power of the critic. That is the system. That is the law. That is the method. Consider an example. You hesitate to send a critical email. The critic whispers, "They will judge you. You are not prepared. You may fail." Step 1, pause. Step 2, breathe. Step 3, respond. Write the email. Send it. Completion neutralizes the critic. Momentum replaces hesitation. Confidence grows. The critic is reduced in volume. Repeat the principle. Criticize less. Act more. Criticize less. Act more. The inner critic thrives on distraction. Do not allow it. Limit input. Silence unnecessary notifications. Reduce social comparison. Avoid conversations that reinforce doubt. Construct an environment that prioritizes execution over opinion. That is the system. That is the structure. That is the discipline. Repetition beats intensity. Structure beats chaos. Action beats criticism. Repeat aloud. Criticize less. Act more. Criticize less. Act more. Another system. Track critic triggers. Maintain a log of recurring critical thoughts. Note the context. Note the timing. Note the habitual reaction. Observation converts automaticity into data. Data converts into strategy. Strategy converts into action. You cannot control what you do not measure. You cannot act on what you do not observe. That is the law. That is the principle. That is the system. High performers do not silence their critic with self-talk. They silence it with structure. They act. They execute. They build momentum. They measure output. They repeat the cycle daily. Habit replaces criticism. Systems replace hesitation. Repetition replaces doubt. That is the principle. That is the method. That is the law. Consider the mental mechanics. The critic thrives when you overthink. Each extra second of deliberation strengthens its voice. Each delayed action reinforces its presence. Each argument with yourself reinforces doubt. The antidote is immediate, repeated action. Pause, breathe, execute. Each micro-action conditions the mind. Each completed task weakens the critic. Each repeated cycle strengthens execution circuits. That is the method. That is the system. That is the law. Implement today. Step 1. Identify one critical thought. Step 2. Pause. Step 3. Breathe. Step 4. Respond with a fact-based, measurable action. Step 5. Record completion. Step 6. Repeat. Step 7. Reinforce. Daily repetition rewires your mind. Daily execution diminishes criticism. Daily structural action builds unshakable confidence. That is the system. That is the principle. That is the rule. You have a choice. Continue debating the critic. Continue arguing internally. Continue postponing. Or implement the system. Observe. Pause. Breathe. Act. Repeat. 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 Criticize less. Act more. Criticize less. Act more. Repetition is compulsory. Execution is non-negotiable. Discipline is mandatory. That is how self-doubt is neutralized. That is how momentum is built. That is how confidence becomes structural. Final principle. The critic only has power if you permit it. Power is stolen through hesitation, overthinking, and distraction. Power is neutralized by observation, structured breathing, and immediate action. Power is neutralized by repetition. That is the law. That is the method. That is the system. Repeat aloud. Criticize less. Act more. Criticize less. Act more. Condition your mind. Condition your behavior. Build unshakable confidence. The next chapter will teach you that action is the antidote to fear and that every hesitation can be replaced with structured execution. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have a choice. Act now. Chapter 6. Action is the antidote to fear. Fear is predictable. It is not mysterious. It is not evidence of weakness. It is self-doubt disguised as caution. It whispers, wait. Not now. You are not ready. You might fail. Every second spent listening to fear is a second wasted. Every hesitation strengthens doubt. Every delay reinforces inaction. That is the law. That is the principle. You have a choice. You can wait for courage, or you can act. That is the key. Do it afraid. Do it now. Do it afraid. Do it now. Repeat it. Let condition your mind. Fear thrives on preparation without action. People prepare endlessly. They read. They research. They plan. They hope that knowledge will substitute for execution. It is not. Knowledge alone never produces confidence. Preparation without completion strengthens fear. Preparation without action validates self-doubt. That is the system the mind uses to stall you. You cannot defeat it with more thinking. You defeat it with action. That is the rule. That is the discipline. That is the method. Step 1. Identify the fear. Name it. Be precise. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of loss. Fear of rejection. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Observe without emotion. Observation converts uncertainty into data. Data converts into actionable steps. That is the system. That is the structure. That is the principle. Step 2. Act immediately. Do not wait for confidence. Do not wait for readiness. Action precedes emotion. Action produces confidence. Action generates certainty. That is the law. Athletes know this. Leaders know this. Entrepreneurs know this. They act before they feel prepared. The outcome is secondary. Momentum is primary. Execution is primary. Action is primary. Repeat. Do it afraid. Do it now. Do it afraid. Do it now. Consider a real-life example. An Olympic sprinter feared the starting block. The mind whispered, "You are not ready. You may false start. You might lose." He paused briefly. He breathed deliberately. He focused on the task, not the fear. Then he ran. Execution overrode hesitation. Performance improved. Repetition of this process conditioned the mind. Confidence became structural. Fear became manageable. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the law. Another example. A CEO faced an investor meeting. Fear told him to wait. Fear told him to perfect the presentation. Fear told him to delay. He acted instead. He presented with incomplete preparation. He delivered facts, solutions, and intent. Outcome: the deal closed. Momentum replaced hesitation. Confidence replaced doubt. Action neutralized fear. That is the principle. That is the method. That is the system. Now, implement a daily system. Step 1. Identify one action you fear today. Step 2. Pause. Step 3. Breathe. Step 4. Execute immediately. Completion neutralizes doubt. Completion builds structural confidence. Completion rewires the mind. Momentum compounds. Fear loses power. Repeat this process daily. That is the discipline. That is the method. That is the law. Repeat aloud. Do it afraid. Do it now. Do it afraid. Do it now. Understand the mechanics. Fear is anticipation of a negative outcome. Hesitation is the behavioral consequence. Both are mental circuits. Both can be rewired. Repetition of deliberate action is the training. Micro-actions, repeated consistently, strengthen execution circuits. Each completed fearful action diminishes anticipation of failure. Each repeated cycle reinforces confidence. That is the system. That is the structure. That is the principle. You will encounter resistance. That is expected. The mind will argue. The critic will speak. Doubt will whisper. Ignore them. That is weakness. That is the trap. You do not negotiate. You execute. You repeat. You enforce the system. That is the law. That is the discipline. That is the rule. Do it afraid. Do it now. Do it afraid. Do it now. Repeat it until automatic. Condition your mind. Condition your behavior. Build unshakable confidence. The second layer, combine micro-commitments with fearful actions. Identify small, repeatable steps that scare you. Execute immediately. Track progress. Repeat. Each micro-action conditions courage. Each micro-action neutralizes fear. Each repeated cycle rewires the mind. That is the structural method. That is the system. That is the law. Final principle. You have a choice. Continue waiting. Continue hesitating. Continue seeking courage before action. Or implement the system. Act despite fear. Execute immediately. Repeat daily. Build momentum. Build confidence. Neutralize doubt. That is the method. That is the system. That is the law. Repeat aloud. Do it afraid. Do it now. Do it afraid. Do it now. The next chapter will teach you how to replace I can't with I will, transforming language into structural confidence. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have the choice. Act now. Chapter 7. Replace I can't with I will. Language is the architecture of thought. The words you speak shape the structure of your mind. They direct attention. They define capability. When you say, I can't, you activate circuits of limitation. Hesitation grows. Doubt strengthens. Momentum disappears. That is the law. That is the principle. That is the system. You have a choice. You can speak weakness into existence, or you can declare action. That is the key. I will. I will. I will. Repeat it. Let condition your mind. Step 1. Observe your language. Listen carefully. Note every I can't, I shouldn't, I'll try, or maybe. These words are automatic doubt signals. They trigger hesitation. They reinforce an action. You cannot act effectively while permitting self-limiting language. That is the rule. That is the law. That is the discipline. Step 2. Replace reactive statements with declarative commitment. Do not hedge. Do not qualify. Do not apologize. Speak in definitive terms. I will finish this task. I will speak up in the meeting. I will take the action required. Declarative language forces structural alignment between thought and behavior. The mind can execute only what is declared. That is the principle. That is the system. That is the method. Consider a practical example. A professional hesitates to send a proposal. The inner dialogue says, I can't risk it. I might fail. I'll wait. Replace with, I will send the proposal. I will execute. I will deliver the outcome. Action follows declaration. Momentum replaces hesitation. Repetition conditions the mind. Neural pathways favor execution over doubt. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the law. Repeat aloud. I will. I will. I will. Step 3. Enforce the habit daily. Begin with micro-commitments. Speak them. Execute them. Complete them. One small task per day is sufficient. Completion reinforces the language of certainty. Completion rewires neural circuits. Completion transforms belief into reality. Language drives action. Action drives confidence. That is the principle. That is the method. That is the law. Observe the consequences of neglect. When you allow "I can't" to remain, hesitation becomes habit. Fear strengthens. Doubt solidifies. Momentum disappears. Opportunity is lost. Confidence never grows. That is the law of language. Words are not idle. Words are instructions to the mind. That is why "I will" is compulsory. That is why declarative language is non-negotiable. Repeat aloud, "I will. I will. I will." High performers understand this principle instinctively. They do not say "I can't" or "I'll try." They declare, "I will." Execution follows declaration. Results reinforce declaration. Confidence compounds. Hesitation diminishes. Language becomes structural. Language becomes discipline. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the law. Implement a daily protocol. Step 1. Monitor your speech and internal dialogue. Step 2. Identify any hedge statements. Step 3. Rewrite them into declarative action statements. Step 4. Execute immediately. Step 5. Record completion. Step 6. Repeat. Daily repetition rewires the mind. Daily execution eliminates self-doubt. Daily alignment of language and action builds structural confidence. That is the system. That is the method. That is the law. Consider another example. A manager hesitates to delegate. "I can't trust them. I'll wait. Maybe I should do it myself." Replace with, "I will delegate this task. I will train them. I will follow through on results." Action occurs. Confidence builds. Hesitation diminishes. Language and behavior align. Neural patterns reinforce execution over doubt. That is the principle. That is the system. That is the law. Repeat aloud, "I will. I will. I will." You may feel discomfort. That is expected. The mind resists change. The inner critic will object. You are not ready. You cannot succeed. Ignore it. Observe it. Replace it with declarative action. Speak the words. Execute the task. Repeat daily. Repetition beats resistance. Repetition strengthens discipline. Repetition converts language into automatic execution. That is the law. That is the principle. That is the system. Final rule, you have a choice. You can continue hedging. You can continue saying, "I can't." You can continue waiting for permission, approval, or confidence. Or you can replace every instance of hesitation with declarative action. Replace every "I can't" with "I will." Declare, execute, repeat, build momentum, build confidence, build structural certainty. That is the system. That is the law. That is the principle. Repeat aloud, "I will. I will. I will." The next chapter will teach you to build a confidence system instead of relying on fragile goals, turning repeated action into unshakable structural confidence. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have the choice. Act now. Chapter 8. Build a confidence system, not a goal. Goals are fragile. They depend on external conditions. They rely on emotion. They rely on motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Emotion fluctuates. Circumstances change. That is why goals fail. That is why self-doubt returns after initial effort. That is the law. Systems are different. Systems are structural. Systems are repeatable. Systems are independent of mood, circumstance, or opinion. Systems create sustainable mental strength. That is the principle. That is the rule. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. You have a choice. You can chase goals. You can hope for motivation. Or you can build systems. That is the key. Systems focus on behavior. Systems focus on repetition. Systems focus on execution. Systems do not wait for approval. Systems do not wait for confidence. Systems produce it automatically. That is the law. That is the method. That is the system. Repeat aloud. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. Step 1. Identify the core behaviors that produce results. Not outcomes. Not abstract ideas. Behaviors. Daily journaling. Exercise. Micro decisions. Planning. Focused work blocks. These behaviors, repeated, compound over time. That is the law. That is the principle. That is the structure. Execution is the engine. Repetition is the fuel. Consistency is the track. That is the system. Step 2. Stack behaviors into a routine. Sequence them. Morning, midday, evening. Each behavior triggers the next. Each micro-action reinforces the habit. Each repeated cycle strengthens the neural pathways of confidence. Systems do not leave gaps. Systems do not rely on willpower. Systems enforce execution. That is the law. That is the rule. That is the discipline. Repeat aloud. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. Step 3. Remove friction. Reduce decision fatigue. Predetermine actions. Simplify inputs. Automate what can be automated. Standardize what can be repeated. The system must run even when energy is low. That is the principle. That is the method. That is the structure. Systems are not optional. They are compulsory. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. Consider the mental mechanics. Goals are external. Goals are checkpoints. They are observed, measured, and often ignored until the last moment. Systems are internal. Systems are embedded. Systems operate automatically. Confidence becomes structural, not dependent on external validation or results. Systems do not stop. Systems do not wait. Systems do not fail easily. That is the rule. That is the law. That is the principle. Example, daily journaling. Most people write sporadically, hoping to track progress or reflect on emotion. That is unreliable. That is fragile. A system enforces journaling at a specific time. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Focused, structured reflection. Daily. Repeated. Automatic. Neural circuits of self-awareness and confidence are reinforced. Action replaces doubt. Habit replaces hesitation. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. Another example, exercise. Goals fail. I will run 5 miles today can fail because emotion falters. Systems succeed. I will exercise daily at 6 a.m. for 20 minutes regardless of mood. Execution occurs automatically. Discipline becomes habitual. Confidence is built structurally. That is the system. That is the principle. That is the law. Repeat aloud. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. The next layer, micro decisions. Each small choice compounds over time. Decide to act. Decide to complete. Decide to focus. Build sequences of execution. Track them. Repeat them. This reinforces the system. This reinforces confidence. This reduces doubt. Systems produce compounding results. Systems do not require external permission. That is the law. That is the rule. That is the discipline. You will encounter resistance. The mind will argue. Circumstances will challenge the routine. The inner critic will object. That is expected. Systems are designed to continue despite resistance. Systems enforce discipline. Systems bypass debate. Systems produce results automatically. That is the principle. That is the method. That is the law. Repeat aloud. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. Implement today. Step 1. Identify 3 behaviors that drive results. Step 2, schedule them. Step 3, execute consistently. Step 4, track completion. Step 5, review weekly. Step 6, adjust slightly if necessary, but maintain core repetition. Step 7, reinforce daily. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the principle. Systems build structural confidence. Systems eliminate reliance on fragile goals. Systems replace doubt with habitual execution. Repeat aloud. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. Final principle. You have a choice. Continue chasing goals that fluctuate. Continue relying on willpower and motivation. Or implement systems. Build structural routines. Repeat behaviors daily. Track execution. Reinforce habit. Replace hesitation with automatic execution. Replace doubt with structural confidence. That is the system. That is the law. That is the principle. Repeat aloud. Systems win. Systems repeat. Systems last. The next chapter will teach you to surround yourself with silent catalysts. People, routines, and environments that amplify your confidence system without distraction or dependency. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have the choice. Act now. Chapter 9. Surround yourself with silent catalysts. Your environment dictates behavior. That is not opinion. That is law. Every person you spend time with, every space you occupy, every stimulus you allow shapes your mind. Exposure to doubt magnifies your own hesitation. Exposure to distraction diminishes focus. Exposure to negativity weakens execution. That is the principle. That is the rule. You have a choice. You can remain in a toxic environment, or you can construct one that amplifies action. That is the key. Your circle shapes your mind. Choose wisely. Your circle shapes your mind. Repeat it aloud. Repeat it daily. Step 1. Audit your environment. Examine the people you interact with most. Note those who encourage inaction, magnify fear, or validate hesitation. Note the places where your focus diminishes. Note routines that amplify distraction. Observation is mandatory. You cannot optimize what you do not measure. That is the system. That is the law. That is the principle. Step 2. Remove or minimize exposure to toxic influences. Distance yourself from those who perpetuate doubt. Limit time in spaces that encourage distraction. Reduce interactions that drain energy. That is not weakness. That is discipline. That is structural execution. That is the system. Every removal creates space for momentum. Every elimination strengthens focus. Your circle shapes your mind. Choose wisely. Your circle shapes your mind. Step 3. Replace negative influences with silent catalysts. These are people, routines, and environments that amplify action without noise. People who act before they speak. People who deliver results. People who model structural discipline. Routines that enforce focus. Spaces that minimize distraction. Microenvironments that trigger execution. These elements amplify confidence and reduce self-doubt automatically. That is the law. That is the rule. That is the system. Consider a case study. A mid-level executive struggled with self-doubt. Her team reinforced hesitation. Meetings became platforms for second-guessing. She implemented a change, limited interactions with doubt-driven colleagues. She added time with high-performing peers who acted decisively. She created focused work blocks in quiet spaces. Momentum increased. Confidence became structural. Self-doubt diminished. Execution became automatic. That is the system. That is the principle. That is the law. Repeat aloud. Your circle shapes your mind. Choose wisely. Your circle shapes your mind. The mental mechanics are clear. The brain mirrors environment. Neural circuits strengthen in response to repeated exposure. Exposure to inaction strengthens hesitation circuits. Exposure to distraction weakens execution circuits. Exposure to criticism reinforces doubt. Exposure to action strengthens confidence circuits. That is the principle. That is the law. That is the system. Repetition of positive exposure compounds results. That is why silent catalysts dominate toxic influences. Step 4. Enforce daily interaction with catalysts. Schedule time with action-oriented individuals. Engage in routines that reinforce execution. Use environments that condition focus. Track these interactions. Observe results. Adjust the system. Repeat, repeat, repeat. That is the method. That is the law. That is the principle. Your circle shapes your mind. Choose wisely. Your circle shapes your mind. Step 5. Combine with micro-commitments. Let small, consistent actions interact with supportive environments. Send the email. Complete the task. Deliver the micro-action. Do it in the presence of or guided by silent catalysts. Momentum compounds. Execution becomes habitual. Confidence becomes structural. Doubt weakens. Repetition strengthens. That is the system. That is the principle. That is the law. Do not underestimate subtle influence. Silent catalysts do not argue. They do not praise excessively. They do not provide motivation. They model execution. They enforce structure. They amplify behavior without noise. That is why they are silent. That is why they are effective. That is why structural confidence grows in their presence. Repeat aloud. Your circle shapes your mind. Choose wisely. Your circle shapes your mind. Resistance will appear. Toxic influences will reassert. The mind may seek familiar environments. That is expected. Discipline is mandatory. Remove. Replace. Reinforce. Repeat. Systems compound. Microactions interact with structural environments. Confidence becomes automatic. Execution becomes habitual. Hesitation diminishes. That is the law. That is the system. That is the principle. Final rule, you have a choice. Maintain exposure to doubt. Maintain exposure to distraction. Maintain exposure to hesitation. Or construct an environment that amplifies execution. Surround yourself with silent catalysts. Repeat structural actions daily. Reinforce confidence circuits. Neutralize self-doubt automatically. That is the system. That is the principle. That is the law. Repeat aloud. Your circle shapes your mind. Choose wisely. Your circle shapes your mind. The next chapter will teach you the final integration of all systems. How to maintain unshakable confidence under stress, distraction, and external pressure. Systems are sequential. Repetition is compulsory. You are ready. You have the choice. Act now. Chapter 10. Take the first step, then never stop. Momentum is not accidental. Momentum is deliberate. Momentum is built by consistent, structured, repeatable motion. Every action compounds. Every micro-commitment strengthens execution circuits. Every completed task reinforces confidence. That is the system. That is the principle. That is the law. You have a choice. You can wait for readiness. You can wait for certainty. Or you can take the first step. That is the key. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Repeat aloud. Repeat daily. Let condition your mind. Step 1. Commit publicly. Announce your intention. Declare your action. Inform someone who will hold you accountable. Public commitment strengthens structural discipline. It enforces follow-through. It converts intention into unavoidable obligation. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the principle. Each declaration reinforces momentum. Each repeated commitment strengthens execution circuits. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Step 2. Track small wins. Every completed action matters. Micro-commitments accumulate into measurable progress. Record each action. Observe results. Reflect briefly. Adjust slightly if necessary. Each tract win compounds momentum. Each repetition reinforces the mind's execution habit. That is the law. That is the system. That is the method. Momentum does not wait for confidence. Momentum is built through action. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Step 3. Reward completion. Not extravagantly. Not for motivation. Reward completion to reinforce neural pathways. A short pause. A mental acknowledgement. A brief note of recognition. Action followed by acknowledgement creates structural reinforcement. Habit strengthens. Execution becomes automatic. Doubt diminishes. Confidence compounds. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the principle. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Consider the mental mechanics. Hesitation delays momentum. Fear reinforces doubt. Overthinking sabotages execution. Each first step breaks the cycle. Each repeated step builds neural circuits of confidence. Each sequence of action strengthens execution pathways. Each completed cycle diminishes hesitation. Momentum becomes structural. Confidence becomes habitual. That is the law. That is the system. That is the principle. Example. An entrepreneur hesitated to launch a product. Fear of failure dominated. Execution was stalled. Step 1. Commit publicly. Announce the launch date. Step 2. Track every micro-action. Email sent, content prepared, test completed. Step 3. Reward completion of each task. Within weeks, momentum became unstoppable. Hesitation disappeared. Action became structural. Confidence was built through repeated steps. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Another example. A student struggled with consistent study. Each day felt heavy. Each session was delayed. Step 1. Declare daily goals allowed to appear. Step 2. Track every focused 5-minute study block. Step 3. Acknowledge completion immediately. Repetition reinforced habit. Execution became automatic. Confidence emerged structurally. Momentum replaced doubt. That is the system. That is the law. That is the method. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. You will encounter resistance. Distraction will appear. The inner critic will object. Circumstances will challenge your steps. That is expected. Systems are designed to function despite resistance. Repetition beats opposition. Habit beats emotion. Momentum is built by continuous execution. Do not pause. Do not debate. Do not wait. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. That is the principle. That is the law. That is the system. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Implement today. Step 1. Identify a single actionable step. Step 2. Commit publicly. Step 3. Execute immediately. Step 4. Track completion. Step 5. Acknowledge the action. Step 6. Repeat tomorrow. Repeat again. Repeat daily. Momentum compounds. Confidence becomes structural. Self-doubt diminishes. Execution becomes habitual. That is the method. That is the system. That is the law. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Final principle. You have a choice. Wait in hesitation. Wait for permission. Wait for certainty. Or take the first step. Commit publicly. Track progress. Reward completion. Repeat daily. Build unstoppable momentum. Build structural confidence. Neutralize doubt permanently. Repeat aloud. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again. Condition your mind. Condition your behavior. Build the life of execution and confidence you deserve. Before you leave, take one additional step. Subscribe to this channel. Reinforce your commitment to continuous improvement. Access every chapter, every system, and every method designed to build structural confidence. Stay in the system. Repeat daily. Momentum compounds. Confidence grows. Take action now. The journey does not end here. Start today. Step. Step again. Step until unstoppable. Step. Step again.